Hi, this is Maurice Odhiambo, the African teacher. So that you understand what is going on in the world, when we study international relations, we look at it mainly through two broad theoretical perspectives. One of them is called realism. The other one is called idealism. These are more of approaches to international relations. When we come to the theories, realism still qualifies as a theory. And when you go to the idealism side, you have the liberal theories. So those are two distinct ways or approaches to understanding international relations. This is the stuff we teach in International Relations 101. In other words, the moment you step into an international relations or an international politics, international studies class, the first thing you are told is that we look at the world through these two broad lenses. Now, the realist theory is usually associated with Hans Morgenthau in his book, Politics Among Nations, The Struggle for Power and Peace. This is the Bible of realism. Okay, so realism is the world of power politics. In other words, realism construes the world as a self-help system, as a system where there is no overarching authority, which then can mediate the interests of different states. Because you do not have an overarching authority, it means, therefore, that the more powerful units or states, therefore, have more influence than the less powerful. And many times they can pretty much do what they want to do. Now let's go to idealism, and of course with it liberal theories and so on and so forth. So idealism came to be as a reaction to the extremities of conflicts in the global system. And of course, it gained a lot of favor after the so-called world wars. The First World War, so-called, and the Second World War, so-called, because these were European wars, not world wars. They were only called world wars to ensnare everybody into the agenda of domination, which was developing, of course, spearheaded by Europeans and Americans. So anyway, that is how idealism came to be, and we still remember the setting up of the League of Nations. Around that time, idealism was at its peak. Then, of course, we also had, the development of international law had already started, but then it gained momentum after that. And of course, the League of Nations collapsed. And in a very intricate manner, the League of Nations actually collapsed because of idealism. The same framework, the same basis for its creation led to its collapse. And so the United Nations, when it was set up, created something called basically the United Nations Security Council, which basically infused realism and idealism. So the putting together the United Nations was an idealist perspective, but for the United Nations to function within a self-help world, it had to have elements of realism, which means that the states, the alliance that had won the so-called Second World War, then basically was the first on the table, so-called the first among equals, and so on. So the United Nations has never been this equal system. The United Nations was shaped by the post-war reality, who had won and who had lost. And those who were punished particularly after the Second World War, of course, were those who lost the war. So it is important to understand that historical framework. So what is happening now is that that order that was created after the so-called Second World War is collapsing, and the final divorce papers were signed at the Davos so-called World Economic Forum. So this is very, very important development. And for my African audiences, again, I have to keep coming back to you. You have to understand this world. You have to understand these dynamics. You have to understand this politics. You have to know that nobody is coming to your rescue. At this point in time, the Europeans are struggling to carve out. You heard someone talk about mid-level powers, the Canadian Prime Minister. The Europeans are trying to carve out their own niche, and we Africans are still asleep. Yet we have some of the most important aspects that can lift us. Population dynamics. Our population is young. It's innovative. It's dynamic. It can build. The Europeans need our young people to help them, but we are not using them to help ourselves.